Wow, well, thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
Yeah.
Just got straight off a flight from New York and straight here. So what could be better, right? I can hardly see any of you, but I trust there's a few people in the audience. I didn't just fly out for 10 people. No, there's a room full of people. Wonderful.
Hi, everyone. My name is Savannah Marking, and I'm a great old friend of Nigel's, so it's a real privilege, actually, to be asking him questions that I've always wanted to ask him. Basically, never been brave enough.
It was one of those things where they asked me, they did the strange thing of saying, who would you like to have interview you? And so I thought, well, this is the perfect opportunity to put a shoe in of someone who was going to ask me the best questions possible. and also I get to see one of my old friends when I come to London. So Havana Marking, who, by the way, she's being very modest. She is an award-winning documentary filmmaker. And you may know one of her great documentaries called Afghan Star. Which was, she got you're meant to be interviewing me, aren't you?
Okay, yes, okay. Because I've known Nigel from school, I've seen you evolve, basically, for over a long period. And so many different roles and so many different things that you've done. And whenever you first tell me about them, quite often I'm like, oh, where did that one come from? How did you get into that? But then when you think about it, it makes total sense every time. You're like, of course you'd be doing that. So how do you decide what it is that you do and also what it is that you don't do?
I mean, I think to take it back to school, where you and I obviously first met, I've always been interested in fashion. Okay, I'd always had an interest in it in many levels. And at school, I took this sort of unusual step to sort of educate myself in many different aspects of the business. I learnt pattern cutting. I learnt weaving. I learnt tailoring. I made my own clothes. In fact, we even designed a hat that sold at the General Trading Company in Sloane Square when I was 17 years old. So we got into the business of fashion very early on. And I think that for me, specifically, having a good knowledge of the background and of how my little business worked at that moment helped me make a lot of decisions going forward. And look, my career started in an unusual, sort of unconventional way, and I think so many people, when you ask them how they got into the businesses that they got into, it isn't the sort of conventional route. You know, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they take risks, and they do things that are outside of the comfort zone, thinking outside of the box. And I remember even at school, doing what I was doing, I had a lot of friends, a lot of other guys say to me, why are you doing that? Why are you studying fashion design? Why are you studying tailoring and sewing? I was on the rugby team. Why do you do that? You know, and I'm like, well, because I'm really interested in fashion, and my brother was working in fashion. I wanted to work with him, and I knew that if I had this background, it was going to help me. And the same story, really, when it leads on to as my career kind of progressed, you know, and I did a stint as a model, which was kind of fun, just as for about 4 or 5 years, and as that ended, I moved into photography. It wasn't because I loved photography or that I needed to be a photographer since I was a kid, but it was a part of the fashion experience for me. And I had now had this 4 or 5 years working as a model, working with photographers, working with designers, working with fashion designers, working with everybody in the business. And that was like a little degree course which added on to what I'd learnt before. So therefore, when I became a photographer, it all kind of sort of continued on. And so on and so forth, as I was, each time I had another opportunity sort of, present itself to me, I was able to fall back on this wealth of knowledge that I'd gained. And it helped made the sort of risks that I was taking. Should I become a photographer? Should I do this? Should I take this other job or this other opportunity? I understood it and it made sense because of what I'd already done.
Yeah, when you were doing those dressmaking classes with me, I would never have imagined that you'd have this great grand future. I thought you were just trying to meet girls.
Well, there was that too. I mean, there's no doubt there was that aspect of it as well. But I'll have you know, you may remember that I won the dressmaking award. I beat all the girls. So, yeah. Guys, it's...
You did, and you were, I think there was one other boy in the whole class. So how do you, that was a risk. Why do you want to take risks?
I think as an entrepreneur, as someone who's taken risks all his life, I come from a family of risk takers, actually. My father was a big risk taker, and he loved to sort of gamble in some respects as well with things that he was doing, but I've always been much more careful and sort of cautious in the way I approach the risks that I take. And for example, yes, you heard that I worked on a show called America's Next Top Model. America's Next Top Model was a very successful TV show. It's actually just recently got canceled after 24 seasons. I did 19 seasons of that show. It became a huge household name show in America and a massive brand internationally. We sold to 150 countries and had an audience of 100 million people worldwide watching that show. But at the time, it was a risk. Believe it or not, because with hindsight, you're like, well, that was a very good idea. Well done for doing that. But I didn't know it at the time. But I remember I was trying to make it as a photographer. And there's a very few people who really make it to the top levels of photography in the fashion business. And when this opportunity presented itself to me, I knew that even though I was doing quite well as a photographer, by doing so, there would be a lot of people who were going to judge me and say, oh, that's cheap, it's prime time, it's mass, it's not fashion, it's not exclusive. However, I also knew it was one way to get my name known by every household pretty much at prime time and to become a household name overnight. That was a way to do that. So it was a risk that I took, and there were a bunch of people who wouldn't hire me. And actually, if you look at America's Next Top Model, at that time, the actual magazines and the sponsors of the show were 17 magazine and Walmart and not fashion brands. Fast forward 10 seasons deep, we're one of the #1 prime shows on on network television, and Italian Vogue is our magazine sponsor. Andre Leontali, editor-at-large of American Vogue, is another one of the judges, and CoverGirl and people like Missoni and Versace are coming on board. So the things changed, and we were there at the right time, and of course at that point we then became high fashion and became acceptable. So what was a risk and could have worked against me actually ended up working out in my favor.
Yeah. One of the things that is very interesting also from that show and everything you've done before, I know you're now working with AC Marriott Hotel.
Absolutely, yeah.
Is this global idea that the America's Next Top Model was going all around the world, this hotel chain is all over the world. How do you manage to keep your identity but appeal to global audiences? How have you managed to make that step?
I mean, I think with any brand, it's about authenticity. And certainly the word authenticity is one of those words that's bandied around by everybody. It's almost overused to some extent. But the reality is that you've got to be true to yourself. And there's no doubt that certainly early on in my career, I made a decision that the fashion industry was something that I was very interested in, but less about being in fashion, because no one really wants to be in fashion. If you're in fashion one moment, you're out the next. Right? So the concept is, with any brand, is that you've got to create something that's more iconic, that's more long-lasting, and that comes from being yourself and being authentic and being solid. And certainly now I've just recently appointed the global brand ambassador for AC Hotels, and for me, one of the reasons why that made so much sense is I'm someone who actually spent many years living in Italy, in Milan, in Paris, of course from London. I'm from Chelsea, from London. And stayed at these hotels for years. So when I was approached in the US with this brand, I actually knew more about AC Hotels than some of the people who were working for AC Hotels in the US, because I had lived it, breathed it, and I immediately put a smile on my face and gave me a nostalgic memory of where I had stayed and what I had done and the deals I was doing at the time when I stayed in them. And I remember saying to some of the people who I was working with, I'm like, listen, when it comes to a great hotel, it's really to do with having a canvas where you can go in and decompress from the cities that you live in, or the cities that you're staying in, so that you have a moment to actually be your creative self, and then so you're ready for the next day,
Obviously, they have taken you on board because it's you and you are the brand. How is that different from creating something which is the brand which you're promoting? In this case, the brand is you. How is that different, and what are the challenges of that?
I mean, for sure, there are different types of brands, and I myself apply myself to different kinds of brands, and I'm not a one-man band. Absolutely, Nigel Barker, the brand, is who I am. But really, if you look at my business as a whole, there are a lot of different things that we're involved with, whether it be a furniture collection, which we design in the US, comes out with a big furniture company out of the Midwest in 40 stores, whether it's a skateboard collaboration that we do with the oldest skateboard company in New York, Shut NYC, whether it's various different television shows that we've produced and directed or magazines that we work with. I feel that no matter what we associate ourselves with, it comes down to style, design, aesthetics, fashion, and being very consistent with that. So when I, for example, work with AC Hotels, my aim and my angle with them is to sort of, I help curate their libraries, I help put art on the walls. The conversation is about being relevant in the sort of fashion space, in the design space, in the art space. And for that, in that way, as long as I stay true to who I am and what I'm interested in, it makes sense, and I can apply that to almost anything.
How do you stop it going to your head and sending you a bit mental?
I don't know that you do you? I mean, I think that there's an element where, being a little crazy can be okay. I mean, I feel that, I do it if I'm enjoying myself. I think having fun with it is very important. As soon as you're not having fun and you're not enjoying the deal, you're not enjoying who you're working with, then it doesn't work. I think, when I looked at for example, my father, who was a great entrepreneur and invested in so many different businesses across the spectrum, it was often interesting for me why he chose the businesses that he got involved with. And it was always because of his level of passion. And I think with me, that's the same thing. I'm a very passionate person. And as long as I'm passionate about the subject, as long as it sort of turns me on, and you have that rush, then you have the drive to make it a success. And I think that's one of the very sort of the key things about any successful entrepreneur out there is that they find a subject, they find a topic, it's authentic to them, they can apply their brand to it, but then they're extremely passionate, and that passion is what drives it and makes it a success. It's contagious.
And who do you talk to when you're about to make those decisions? And obviously, you don't make decisions overnight, but who do you actually say, is this going to be good for my brand, or is it not going to be good for my brand? Or does it always come from inside?
It doesn't always come from within inside. I mean, I think there is a gut reaction, which does come from inside. Like, there are certain times, but also, the reality is that you think of something, you're like, oh, is this going to be great? Not everything works out. Not everything is a huge success. One either hears about all the successes, or one hears about the failures in life. There tends to be two sides of the story. But the reality is that there is ups and downs. There are moments where some things are like, maybe that wasn't so great, or maybe the timing isn't right. Some ideas are brilliant 5 years from the time you had them. And I think that's an interesting thing too, because timing is key, is crucial. And I'm going to reference my father. I remember when fax machines came out, and he bought 2 fax machines because he had no one to fax. So he gave one to the bank so he could fax the bank back and forth. Timing was crucial. Of course, faxes came into their own, but it's all about timing.
Yeah. And so do you find that, is there one person in particular that you talk to, or is it part of the group decision and as part of your business?
I've been very lucky. As you know, I met my wife 22 years ago. And focus for me is incredibly important. And certainly being married and being with the same woman for 22 years made us extremely focused, extremely, as a team. All of a sudden, 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes, so really she's my number 1 person to go to. But as a group, everyone who's worked with me now, having a core group of people that work for you, that trust you. We've had our employees now who have worked for us, many of which have worked for us for over 10 years, 15 years. I'm a very loyal person. And I think that's very important in actually having a successful business. Having people and employees who are very loyal, who understand who you are, and together we grow.
How long have we got? Oh, we've got 5 minutes. Good. When an idea comes, do you try to test it out? Do you talk to people and say, I'm thinking about doing this? Do you get people's reaction? And if people's reaction is terrible. Is that you the kind of person that makes you think, right, that makes me more want to do it? Or how do you judge things?
Yes, I never ask anyone's opinion on
Really?
that. So that's interesting. So
Okay.
I think that's one of the interesting things. You can ask, there are people out there who love to ask people's opinion on everything. And the very first one to say, and I get asked this question a lot, and it certainly applies to being a photographer, it applies to, I think, almost any job, quite frankly. But if you are constantly waiting for other people's approval, then I don't think you're very lucky if you actually make a success of yourself. You really have to believe in yourself. As corny as that sounds, trust me, if you do not believe in what you're doing and what you're about, then, that whole contagiousness of the passion of why you're into it just doesn't catch on. So, for example, when I did my collaboration with Shut NYC, this skateboard company, a lot of people said to me, well, you don't even skateboard. What are you doing? Why would you collaborate with a skateboard company? The reason I was doing it was because my son, who was 10 years old, was getting into skateboarding. I wanted to think of something that would bridge the gap between him and me. And he wasn't interested in photography. But here is where I could marry his world and my world. So I would then was able to become just as passionate about it. Of course, I got into skateboarding. I started to hang out with these skateboard guys and meet them all, and that was very interesting for my son. And so the passion grew there. And of course, I all of a sudden became this guy that knew all about skateboards and had skateboards all over the country and what have you. And it was very much a fish out of water. But the passion drives you. And so that it made sense in that capacity.
So the narrative of that with Jack, your son, allowed you to then bring the passion to that.
Absolutely.
Story.
Well, the narrative is crucial.
Yeah.
There has to be a story for me. And I believe in any sort of successful venture, if there isn't a story, yes, you can make up a brand. And you can have, there are brands that are successes that really just come out of nothing. But for me, then that never really makes sense. And I'm often brought on as a creative consultant for brands to help them actually discover where they came from. They kind of forget what their story is, or they're not sure what their story is, to actually decipher what that story is and help make sense of it. And by applying, the sort of the fashion magnifying glass to some extent, that often helps because most businesses want to be in fashion. They want to be seen as being fashionable. And so, that's one of the things we're able to do for brands is come in and sort of wrap them in a blanket that sort of talks to all things fashion, beauty, and style.
Yeah. It's been interesting to see, though, how the fashion thing has kind of become style now. It's I don't know, I would associate you now with just incredibly iconic style rather than catwalk models. It's amazing how quickly that evolves.
Well, and one hopes, that's always the aim. There's no doubt that one always aims to move into the style area. Style is obviously the more iconic concept of fashion. And but even if you look at the biggest brands in the world, whether you're talking about Dior or Chanel or any of the major Prada, any of the major fashion brands, as fashionable as they are in that moment, in that collection, really the history and the heritage of them is the reason why we buy into them. Yes, a collection may be a success or maybe not, but the success of the brand itself is because of everything they've ever done. And so I think, as an entrepreneur or as a brand, if you're building a brand, you also have to think of that as well. You can't let one moment, one season bring your entire company and brand and everything you've done down. You have to sort of think about this bigger picture, about everything else that you're touching. And you'll see that even with these huge, iconic brands, that they've been involved with all kinds of different enterprises, which oftentimes may seem a bit out of place. But because of their passion or because of an interest, they make it make sense. And they apply that same brush to it.
And as you were saying, some ideas don't work out, some projects don't work out. When do you decide, okay, this isn't working out, this isn't for me, I'm not going to do this anymore? Like, at what point, how far do you get before you think, actually, I think
sometimes you don't get, sometimes you're not sure. I think the interesting thing is that, if you are driven by the passion of doing it, obviously the numbers will tell you that you have to move on. The numbers will be, this is financially not making sense, it's costing you too much to do this. But there are times too when you sort of say, well, to hell with it. I'm going to invest some more money in it. I'm going to make this work. I believe in this project. It may not be the moment, might not be just now. But I think that if I stick at it, in a 2 years' time, it's going to click. And this particular collaboration will make sense. And so, certainly in the television world, it's very fickle. And I've been involved with many different shows. We also created my own show, The Shot, on VH1. And that was a show which really was before its time. It didn't do very well. It did one season and then didn't do very well. Now we're bringing it back again. So The Shot is coming back again, 7 years later, which is unheard of on television, because the timing is right now. Back then, people really weren't into photography as much. Now, every one of you probably has a camera on your phone, and you all take pictures, and everyone's on Instagram, and everyone's Snapchatting, and so there's a much larger interest in photography. So timing was crucial, and of course, it's all come back to itself now.
That's really exciting.
Yeah.
That's great. So how do you even remember all those ideas? If timing's so important, do you go back to the ideas and look at them every now and then and say, wait a minute, maybe we should think about that one again? Or, again, do they just evolve? How do you...
Listen, I believe that it's hard sometimes to keep track of everything that you're doing, but I think, with us, we have multiple people who work with me on different accounts. So no matter what we're doing or who we're working with, every single account that I'm working on has an account executive and has someone who's heading that particular project up, and I'll oversee all of them. And some, make more sense than others, like I said. So, we'll have reports back on how certain collaborations are working and how others, are evolving, and so that we know we need to apply more pressure or more time or more effort or more money to certain areas to help, everything make sense across, the big platforms that we work on.
And how much is it you approaching people, and how much is it people approaching you?
I think you have to be very proactive. In this world, you can wait for people to contact you. And there's no doubt that we get contacted, which is a wonderful position to be in. But I've never waited for that. And I've told everyone who I work for, and certainly the way I see things, is by being very in touch with the moment, being very aware of what's happening, being very plugged in to society as a whole, pop culture, everything that's going on. You are there reacting as and when things happen. You're very much aware of what needs to be done and creating new ideas and new concepts that work with what's happening in the world right now and reacting to them.
And final question, how important is just actual networking and being out there and just talking to people? Or can you do it all from your office and then go home at night?
I think it depends on who you are and what you're doing. I think, listen, some people are great networkers, but I don't think you have to be a great networker. I think that there are different types of people, different kinds of businesses, different times when certain things make sense and certain things don't make sense. And people spend a lot of time networking. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of business that is done because of networking and because of who you know rather than what you know. But I think that's also changing now, and that more so than ever, there's so many people who are doing great things, and because of communication the way it is, through social media, through the internet, that the world has become a much smaller place, and that you can discover a great idea or a great concept or a great person or a great hire without having to actually network and have them just directly in your close group of friends and people who you network with. So I still tell people, listen, really, if you're good at something, just go for it and make yourself known, and potentially we'll find you.
Very good. Thank you. I think we're at the end of our time, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much.